epicenter. New York specifically is the epicenter of the entire pandemic. There are now more cases in the US than there are in China. So we're going to talk about the US government's domestic response. But I think what's interesting more than that, because that's covered by mainstream corporate media outlets, what's not interrogated enough is how the US government, the Trump administration, has been using this pandemic, this crisis, to push a very aggressive foreign policy, pushing aggressive sanctions on countries, expanding sanctions, pushing for regime change policies. Of course, just yesterday, on Thursday, the Trump administration actually put charges out against the government of Venezuela and essentially put a hit on the head of President Nicolas Maduro for $15 million, essentially for any information that could lead to the arrest or potentially even death of Nicolas Maduro. So there's a lot to talk about there, but I think the main point that we just want to get at is how really the US empire is using this pandemic to push these disastrous regime change policies that we at the Grayzone frequently cover. So I'm going to cut here to Max, and Max is going to begin our discussion. And throughout this discussion, of course, we're going to engage with you all, with the audience. We're going to answer any questions you have, and we're going to try to hit every single angle. So if there's a topic that you think we haven't covered well, definitely ask us about it. So here I'm going to cut to Max now, and he'll give us an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. Welcome everyone who's watching now. Me and Anya are kind of like down here on the same camera. I'd wanted to be in my own quarantine hole. We're here, and I don't want to look like Sonny and Cher here. I'm definitely not going to become a Republican congressman like Sonny Bono. And while I really enjoyed Cher tweeting toilet and emoticons to signify Donald Trump, Anya is going to become a banal resistance liberal. So even despite our little shtick here, our duo here, we promise we won't be like Sonny Bono or Cher. I remember Redman had a disturbing line about Sonny Bono. I've been through more trees than Sonny Bono, so I hope I don't end up like that. And as Ben said, we're in self-quarantine. What is self-quarantine? We want your thoughts on that, because everybody I know who's sort of in self-quarantine goes out to the grocery store every day. We went out yesterday and looked around DC, and people are just out in the streets. So I don't know what's really happening with self-quarantine. We're going to explore whether a lockdown is taking place. But what we're watching in this country right now, and I mean, this is very seriously exposed in a way I don't think we've seen since the financial crash of 2008, 2009. But I think this is going to be much more severe. And as Ben said, and anyone probably who's watching knows, I mean, we cover U.S. sanctions policy, U.S. economic warfare, what, could be called financial terrorism against other countries. And we're seeing that system that the U.S. exports at the barrel of a gun often come home now. And many Americans have basically been living under a form of sanctions for hundreds of years. Mary Bassett, who is the head of Harvard's basically its public health department. She's, I think, an epidemiologist, someone who's, not exactly going to be a Grayzone guest, said that the U.S. will be hit by this pandemic worse than any other country because A, our healthcare system sucks. We have no universal healthcare. B, massive poverty, just millions of people living in poverty. And C, mass incarceration, the largest prison system in the world. Our prisons are petri dishes for this disease. As our friend Amanda Klonsky, who Anya interviewed at Red Lines, just told us, the cases in Cook County prisons in Chicago of coronavirus, they're now starting to possibly exceed those in Rikers Island. And what's anybody doing with the prisoners? Are the older prisoners being let out? It doesn't seem like now. So the system that we've exported at the barrel of a gun, the system that cost 3 to 5 million excess deaths in Russia in the 90s when it fell under IMF and U.S. control, it's always been here. and now it's being exposed. As Ben mentioned, the Trump administration, national security state with very little resistance from the Democratic Party, is exploiting this moment to weaponize coronavirus. We've seen in the past week the Trump administration threaten countries that are accepting help from heroic Cuban medical brigades, which need them. That includes Italy, the hard-hit Lombardy region. Pompeo, who looks like kind of like a Bolshevik cartoon of a Nazi bankster criminal walking like an embodiment of those cartoons, has tightened sanctions on Iran at a time when Iran is losing.
I don't have the original cover.
All right, that's going to fall over now. This will be our first red line.
You know what I was thinking then.
Yeah, so Mike Pompeo, the Democrats never talk about Pompeo. He's like the key villain in the Trump administration. I mean, it's like he ate John Bolton and is just walking around with John Bolton in his third stomach. And
I gotta say, he's
so
cartoonishly evil. Pompeo, really quickly, just while we're talking about this, Pompeo, this is, of course, the former director of the CIA, where he said, when I was director of the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stole. I mean, honestly, as bad as Trump is, the so-called resistance always fixates on Trump. Pompeo is even more evil. This guy is, I mean, he is just like, he gets off on starving people around the world, killing people with sanctions, and he's tried to start a war with Iran like 8 times now.
Yeah, he clearly gains some kind of libidinal satisfaction from starving people to death. George Carlin said the U.S.'s foreign policy is bombing brown people. Mike Pompeo just likes watching them kind of slowly starve and then get eaten by maggots. It gives him a little bit. I'm getting to let other people talk. There's going to be a lot of other talking, so don't worry. But I just wanted to wrap up here with kind of the bulletin on what the U.S. is doing to weaponize coronavirus. Finally, there's doctors begging for N95 masks. There aren't enough masks. There are professionals around the country hand knitting masks. And the Trump administration's Department of Justice, led by William Barr, who pardoned all the Iran-Contra war criminals back in the 80s, they conjured up $15 million. I told you that the first Grayzone blooper was coming. They conjured up $15 million to indict Nicolas Maduro, to put a mafia-style hit on the head of Venezuela's elected president, and $10 million bounties for members of his inner circle, including like Diosdado Cabello, who the CIA has been trying to pry away through various tricks. And we have an article up at the Grayzone right now by our friend Leonardo Flores about how this has already backfired. Keep talking. Thank you. Give a minute. Cliver Oclala is a figure on the Trump administration's hit list that it put out on March 26th. He is a former Venezuelan general who has basically been leading the armed wing of Juan Guaido's coup attempt. His band of Contras was present on the border on February 23rd, 2019 for the Battle of the Bridges. They did not activate. And after, I'm going to pass to Anya here. Whatever, I'm going to pass to you anyway. He confessed on Colombian TV in his own home that, number one, he was afraid that he would be killed in a false flag operation. And number two, he was planning a violent assassination attempt that had been broken up in recent days in Colombia alongside Juan Guaido. And his confession means that Juan Guaido is likely to be arrested, that Guaido was actually involved in a violent assassination plot. And all of this was revealed thanks to this Trump administration hit. This is all happening below the surface of the very justified coronavirus panic in the country. Anya, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say there. But
Max, I wanted to ask you about this because this is a crazy detail. So the Trump administration just indicted, who then exposes the fact that he was involved in a plot with Juan Guaido to go after Maduro. So how did it go where the U.S. is now indicting him when, even as he says, Al-Khalif is telling the truth, that U.S. officials signed off on his plan with Guaido? How is it that he's now being indicted? Is this because this case has been in the works for many years now, and so to make this case, they had to include him? Or was this just a massive oversight? I mean, it was, but how do you think that they managed to indict him when he was integral to their own regime change plans?
Right. I mean, he's also wanted by the government of Venezuela. Maduro was asked this same question yesterday, and he said that he believes that Alcala's plan failed, and so the U.S. was basically trying to dispose of him, along with Hugo Carvajal, El Pollo, who's the former director of national intelligence or the intelligence services of Venezuela, who has been turned on this list. So the U.S. is eating its own here and apparently throwing Juan Guaido into the garbage.
And also a very high-level judge, too, who was reportedly, I'm not sure if it's confirmed, but the Washington Post claimed that he was involved in a coup plot as well, but yet he also is on this list. So basically, it's the U.S. basically deciding that their regime change effort through these people, I guess, has failed, so they're going to go ahead and throw them under the bus and even indict them.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to read it. There's a lot of intrigue here that we weren't even able to cover, but really recommend the point is Leonardo Flores's piece that we have up at the Grayzone. Interestingly, the Department of Justice put out a hotline. Know about the whereabouts of Nicolas Maduro? Well, I met Nicolas Maduro. Anya met him. We met him in Miraflores Palace. So, we're here to tell William Barr he's in Miraflores Palace. I know that may be a big revelation to you. And when we get the $15 million, we are going to donate a majority of it to buy masks for our local medical heroes here, since the Trump administration can't seem to come up with that money or produce them. I don't know if anyone else wants to follow up there.
Yeah, I'll jump in just to say that I wanted to give some of our fans who have made comments online a little shout out. Someone named Andre Amazon commented that us here at the Grayzone and Loud and Clear keep him sane. So thank you for that. I am also a huge fan of Loud and Clear. That's the show Brian Becker and John Kiriakou host on Sputnik. So thank you for that comment. Definitely a good source of information. And someone else said something funny that I wanted to bring up. He said, Pompeo is like if the Pillsbury Doughboy was life size. That's kind of true. That is pretty much what he looked like. And became a villain.
What's that movie? Ghostbusters at the end when the Pillsbury Doughboy becomes like the giant like villain that destroys the city. That's just Mike Pompeo.
That comment was made by Sam K. I don't know if that could be Sam Knight, a friend of ours. It sounds like something he would say. But anyway, thank you for that. On the point of Venezuela and the United States not taking a rest during this pandemic in order to push through its maximum pressure promised against Maduro's march and charge him with drug trafficking in the United States. Aaron asked about the fact that this general who had already switched and was working with Juan Guaido in the United States to run a violent coup or a military invasion of some sort against Venezuela, against the sovereign state and the government, yet he's still charged in this indictment released yesterday by the U.S. government as being involved in drug trafficking. So is the former director of national intelligence, Hugo Carvajal. This is not the first time the United States has burned individuals from Venezuela whom actors to their own governments essentially switched sides and provided information to the U.S. government, which then in turn pressed charges against them. Hugo Carvajal is a great example. He was someone who fled Venezuela and actually came to the United States, I believe it was in 2015, and in return for giving information about the industry minister, Tarek El Isami, who was also named in this indictment, Carvajal was he was removed permanently from the U.S. sanctions list, something which he had been added to.
He was an accused narco trafficker.
Well, that's that's what's come out. Anyways, that he is an accused narco. What was I saying?
And so they flipped him.
Well, they flipped him. He was removed from the sanctions list. He was last year in the New York Times featured in this piece, which they used to claim the intelligence services were turning on the Maduro government right in time for this attempted military coup in February of last year. And he got all that attention and praise. Within months, Carvajal was already arrested by Spanish authorities in the United States. And so he was already charged. He was already under arrest. He was already betrayed by the United States. And now he's only been further implicated. Same thing with the general Max spoke of before. And so what the United States is doing when it puts out a monetary reward for information leading to the capture or conviction of the Venezuelan president, it's not only just a hit on his head in this gangster style way, it's also a direct incentive for people in the inner circle to come to the United States to provide information to the US government, regardless of its accuracy. It's kind of like when you are being tortured or waterboarded, you might end up saying whatever it is your torturer wants you to say. And if anyone in the Venezuelan government or in the circle of Maduro is considering taking the U.S. up on that $15 million reward right now, or whatever it is, an absurd amount, they should look at Carvajal and other individuals like them, because these two men in this indictment are not the only two examples. But there are many examples of former officials who have come here and thought that they were going to be handed the silver spoon and red carpet treatment by the United States. And in some cases, they're charged themselves. And in other cases, they end up running luggage lanes at the airport, jobs that they probably didn't expect to come to the United States and work in exchange for their betrayal of the Venezuelan government. So it really, this reward, this bounty the U.S. has put out against the Venezuelan president really exposes the U.S. to be an untrustworthy actor if you are someone in the Venezuelan government who is thinking about betraying your country. And so that was my interpretation of some of it. One other interesting point I'll note is that in the
Yeah, I'll jump back to you.
Oh, I was just going to make one last point. If you didn't hear what I was saying, it was just that the U.S. actually, it referred to President Maduro as a Venezuelan citizen in the statement it released on the State Department's website, but it made what, in my view, and what I think in many legal observers would say, it was a big mistake. And they actually referred to Tarek al-Aissami, Maduro's minister, as the industry minister of Venezuela, accidentally acknowledging that he does indeed represent the Venezuelan government. So while they were trying to gloss over the fact they were indicting the president of Venezuela with a drug trafficking charge, they weren't very thorough and inadvertently end up endorsing the reality that the minister who works under Maduro, Tarek al-Aissami, is actually the industry minister of Venezuela, which I thought was interesting.
Hey, Aaron, do you want to jump in?
I'm going to get some headphones because I hear there's an echo.
Well, I first wanted to rebuke Max because before he quoted a Red Man line, and I wanted to say that on behalf of the journalism community, only Ari Melber, Max, of MSNBC, is allowed to quote.
God.
You can't hear Max, but he laughed really hard when he went upstairs.
Let me read a couple of super chats we got from Rick M. All of you at the Grayzone are heroes. Wish I could give more. Thank you, Rick. We really appreciate that. Mariah Denman, thanks, guys. Thank you, Mariah. Sadi, great information as usual. Now take my money. Thank you, Sadi. Thank you. Thank you.
We gladly will. Thank you.
Ben, let me ask you more about Venezuela before we go on to other topics. What do you think is the play here for the Trump administration? So obviously, Venezuela is dealing with this pandemic like everybody else, so they're especially vulnerable. Now they've put up this bounty where somebody who turns on Maduro and other top officials gets $15 million. What do you think their thinking is? What are they hoping for? And if this fails, like every other stage of this coup effort has, what do you think comes next?
That's a good question. I mean, I think they don't really know. The Trump administration doesn't really know what comes next because they've exhausted most other possibilities, which is why we've gotten to this point. So let's be clear really quickly about what the things the Trump administration have done are. So the Trump administration has tried multiple times to assassinate Nicolas Maduro. Most recently, 2 years ago, there was a drone assassination plot, and Maduro was giving a speech, and a drone came and tried to kill him, and his bodyguards protected him. And after that attack, the corporate media, including The Guardian, the liberal news website Think Progress, many other websites, pretty explicitly said that they said it was a false flag attack, which is obscene. It was not a false flag attack. We now know that the Trump administration White House was directly involved in orchestrating that attack. Specifically, John Bolton, according to Venezuelan intelligence, John Bolton was involved, and he did not deny that. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it. And also, we have seen that there were other assassination attempts. The drone assassination attempt was later confirmed. There was an opposition figure, a military defector, former military person, who admitted in an interview with CNN that he was involved in the assassination attempt. So that needs to be very clear, that there were at least 3 assassination attempts, and they failed. So the Trump administration is now saying, well, if our own assassination attempts didn't work, now what we have to resort to is trying to bribe people, putting a hit out to encourage people inside Venezuela to assassinate Nicolas Maduro. That is directly the strategy at this point. So the $15 million, are people saying the volume is too low? All right, I'm turning my volume up. So just scream. Yeah, no, wait 1 second, Max, I'm going to cut to you because they can't hear you. Go ahead.
Well, just as far as, turning up the volume or turning up the temperature, I mean, the U.S. is going after the big fish now. They're using this epidemic to go after China in a way they haven't before. And we've done a lot of work exposing this whole PR blitz that's been rolled out against China over the past few months. It's really escalated. And first of all, thanks to Chris Kruger for the wedding wishes. We got Mazel Tov from Chris Kruger, and other people are asking about Event 201, the Gates Foundation Event 201. We are definitely planning to talk about that, and we're going to start transitioning into a lot of the preparations that have been made for pandemics. I think there are a lot of what could be called conspiracy theories floating around. Other people could call them working hypotheses. And a lot of those are coming from Chinese officials right now. Ben and I interviewed Pepe Escobar, who's one of our favorite geopolitical analysts, yesterday on Moderate Rebels. I recommend everyone check that out because we got into this discussion where the U.S. has turned the temperature up so much on China with this PR blitz on forced labor, on millions of Uyghurs in concentration camps, a trade war, putting tariffs on $115 billion in Chinese goods, locking up a CEO of Huawei, banning Huawei 5G, aggressive moves in the South China Sea, obviously seeing China as the major threat, and correctly so, to American global hegemony. And, China is prepared in a way for this pandemic that the U.S. is not, so much so that it's able to export aid and actually help save lives in Italy while the U.S. sits there and watches in frustration and anger. We've seen video of Italian citizens replacing the EU flag with Russian and Chinese flags. But at the same time, we've seen Chinese officials like the Minister of Information from the Foreign Ministry. And as Pepe Escobar explained to us, this is cleared at the top of the Foreign Ministry. Li Zhao has gone on Twitter in English and accused the US government of being the source of the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus. He said that this may not have originated in the US. And we can get into some, I said it's a conspiracy theory. Pepe said this is actually the working hypothesis of the Chinese government. And the US has responded with ferocious anger to this accusation. But there are a lot of strange coincidences there. I don't see any substantial evidentiary basis for this, but there are a lot of coincidences, and a lot of people in the comments are referring to Event 201. Does anyone want to talk about what that is? And I think we can, start getting into some of the clear and very eerie preparations that were being made in the weeks and months leading up to the explosion of novel coronavirus, first in China, allegedly first in China, then in Europe and the US. Do you want to?
Yeah, Anya, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Anya. Sure, I will jump in and also just give a shout out to so that people who don't know, to Ben, who while we're doing this is not only participating in the live stream, but he's responsible for throwing up all the graphics and doing all that also. So he's wearing many hats and doing a really nice job. And I saw people praising his reporting in the chat too.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. On the topic of 201, Event 201, many people have probably seen reports about this tabletop event held last October at Johns Hopkins University, actually at the Bloomberg Medical School of Johns Hopkins University, named after Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City and billionaire former presidential candidate. And what this simulation was, it was sponsored by the Gates Foundation, the World Bank, one other major institution that's blurbed at the bottom that I can't remember and I don't want to get wrong.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, World Economic Forum, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
There we go. And maybe if it's possible to bring a scroll through up of the Event 201 page, you can see there, yeah. It was a simulation run by professionals. We don't exactly have an idea of everyone who is at this forum, but they simulated a pandemic, an outbreak, and they actually named it to be a novel coronavirus. And in their simulation, they said that it began as something transmitted between pigs and farmers, spreads through the Brazilian, the country of Brazil, then South America. And if you read the page, I don't want to get caught up in doing that now, you can see that it essentially describes the reality, which took place just a few months later in beginning December. Actually, now we're hearing reports that coronavirus was popping up in November in China. And it describes our reality. It describes the economic crisis and the fact that we were greatly underprepared. It predicts 65 million deaths to come as a result of this kind of outbreak. And when people started pointing out the obvious similarities between what happened or what was simulated in Event 201 and then what did happen with the outbreak of coronavirus, the event planners released a statement saying they wanted to be clear they were not predicting this outbreak. The numbers that applied or were calculated in that outbreak were not based on any of the science that we have right now regarding coronavirus around the world, or COVID-19, I should say, the novel form of coronavirus we're currently dealing with. And other people are pointing at this to say, well, this shows that it was somehow planned or launched from the United States. That, I think, is getting a little bit carried away. We can get more into the theories about where any of this could have come from. But at this point, most of them are working theories. No one has hard evidence. The one point that I would make about Event 201 is if this simulation took place, which obviously it did, who was involved? Where are the people who studied its results or had a discussion about it? Because we should know, at the very least, we should know what they determined as much as possible, as much as the information that they they accumulated or learned through this event? What was the purpose of it, if not for producing information that could benefit the public? That's what it should have been about. If they're not going to share that information with us, then I think you can start to raise other questions. But at the very least, we should say, where are the results of Event 201? What do we know about ourselves based on it?
Well, and especially if you know the kinds of things that the Gates Foundation has been pushing for many years. The thing about the Gates Foundation is that it's frequently portrayed by corporate media outlets as some kind of great benevolent philanthropic organization that exists solely to help people. That's the entire goal. But actually, what it really is, it's a scam. I mean, it's a scheme. It's a privatization scheme. What Bill Gates, one of the richest humans on earth, really, he and Jeff Bezos go back and forth for being the richest human being on earth. What he's doing is he, over years, has been creating a massive privatized health infrastructure to such a degree that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is, in fact, one of the main donors to the World Health Organization, actually probably the second largest donor. So this private billionaire capitalist, this man who is more powerful than entire nations on this planet, has created this massive infrastructure that he controls as this billionaire, and then he uses that, of course, to create business opportunities for his companies, for his friends' companies. And there are so many so-called business opportunities, but essentially is exploiting these massive crises to make billions, trillions of dollars. Think about how much money a company could make if they have a vaccine or some kind of medicine to treat coronavirus. And this is not even just my speculation. It was just announced that Bill Gates and Zuckerberg, the demon spawn of Facebook. I mean, just look at his congressional testimony. This guy looks like an alien. He's like, why? He's like, who are you, other human beings? This guy, he's been social distancing for his entire life. I mean, and these two billionaire oligarchs, are now working together to try to basically privatize the cure for coronavirus. So, I mean, there could potentially be some serious questions we have to ask, and we can talk more about what was going on in Frederick, Maryland, at the experimental U.S. Army bioweapons lab, the Wuhan military games. There's a lot of questions to answer, but I think that even those aside, we don't really know the answers to those questions. But what we do know the answer to is that so many companies and billionaires are trying to make money out of this crisis here, and instead of empowering states to take action, as we saw in China, it was the state response, the public response that successfully contained this outbreak. Instead of empowering these states, these billionaire oligarchs, they don't want governments to have the ability to deal with public health crises. They want large corporations, the private sector, and billionaire oligarchs to be the ones who control public health infrastructure. Well, it's not even public health infrastructure, which is, of course, privatized.
Exactly. Before we follow up, I mean, we have some footage that I just think everyone should be exposed to if they haven't seen it from Event 201 that I just found. Look, epidemiologists knew that a pandemic was coming, so I'm not sitting here alleging that Bill Gates in his computer cave while he was doing his in Seattle or whatever it was.
Windows doesn't even work well enough.
Windows. He probably couldn't muster this up, and he's overseen a lot of failures in the past. So I'm not saying that, but it's just very eerie the way that they predicted exactly what's happening right now in October, and that the results of this simulation are not fully publicly available. So Ben, they produced a sort of a fake news reporter. They made their own kind of news simulation from GNN detailing what the virus will be like, how the public is going to hoard, will die, and it's very similar to what's happening. Maybe we can play a minute of that right now. Is that possible?
Yeah, I have it set up right here. So, so for those watching, Max and the others aren't going to be able to hear this, but for those watching, I'm about to play a clip here. This clip you can find on YouTube it's called Center for Health Security. And this is the account that held the Event 201. So this clip, these are publicly available, and you can look into this and do some of your own research. And in fact, I encourage anyone, be citizen journalist, wear the journalist cap, and go check this stuff out and investigate it yourself. But here, I'm going to play some of these really strange clips here, and we can kind of respond to them. So here's one right here.
Start the meeting by viewing this news story that just aired on Global News Network.
All right, sorry, we're having some technical issues here with the audio, so I'm working on that. But you can see here, this is the video from Event 201, and you can see this GNN, which is like this fake CNN-style news network they made. And you can see here that this is
more people. This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week. At this rate, we can expect to see 16 times as many cases in a month unless we find a way to interrupt transmission. The virus appears to be spreading rapidly in densely populated and impoverished neighborhoods in some megacities in South America. CAPS is a serious respiratory disease. More than half of the recognized cases have required hospital care, creating a huge strain on healthcare systems. The fatality rate is about 10%. For comparison, CAPS is about as lethal as SARS and 2 to 4 times more lethal than the 1918 influenza pandemic, the worst pandemic on record. Even so, some people only exhibit mild flu-like symptoms, not requiring treatment in a hospital. Alarmingly, those people are able to walk around and spread the virus, not realizing they are doing so. Even worse, international travelers have been arriving at their destinations symptom-free, but within a matter of hours, becoming ill. Travel-related cases have blossomed into outbreaks in a number of locations and have quickly grown faster than health authorities could respond and contain them. In other places, physicians have quickly recognized the symptoms of CAPS and have been able to isolate infected individuals and avoid an outbreak, for now.
Here, I'm going to go to some other
Global public health experts are very concerned about this disease because it appears the virus is readily transmitted through the...
And this is a clip around, for anyone who wants to find this themselves, this is around 44 minutes.
And where those can be deployed, but also CEPI, which was established 3 years ago to accelerate vaccines exactly in development in these settings where a coronavirus is, in fact, one of its indications and first areas of focus. That may not be common knowledge. Likewise, on the financing, there is global financing. The criteria identified here would be triggers for the pandemic emergency financing facility, which
this is the World Bank
a significant
executive
amount of money into that international pool on the basis of this trajectory of the epidemic. So those are resources that may not be well understood amongst the
talking about
set of
N95
players
masks?
that would.
Yeah, anyway, so, I mean, it's hard to kind of go through all those clips and show, live what exactly they were discussing, but I would encourage people, I mean, again, those clips are on YouTube, and they're pretty eerie. I mean, some of the things they predicted how there would be a shortage of N95 masks, and this is pretty wild because if you knew there was going to be a shortage of masks, then why wouldn't you have solved that issue? And of course, we can talk about now who the Trump administration is refusing to even pay for the creation of new ventilators, which is insane. I mean, that's essentially murder. So there's a lot of things to respond to. Yeah, I'll jump back to you, Anya. Go ahead.
As of today, the Trump administration did ratify the Defense Production Authorization Act in order to require General Motors to produce ventilators. So that is the beginning of what many people were calling for, which is for the Defense Production Act to be implemented as it was during World War II in order to produce machine guns. The rest of the world has declared war on this virus, and now it sounds like the president is starting to take this more seriously. I don't know if it's too little too late. Something else we should note, this should be a massively huge story, but it was broken on Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon, Friday evening by the Trump administration. But the White House issued an executive order just a few hours ago calling up 1 million reservists in the U.S. military in order to fight coronavirus. So we should start to consider what that means for us as a country. The president and the coronavirus task force he's put together, led by Vice President Mike Pence. 2 weeks ago said that they had 15 days to flatten the curve. That was their slogan. That 15 days is up on Wednesday. Trump said in a tweet, they will reevaluate steps necessary to fight coronavirus after that point. I think we should pay attention to the fact he's just called up 1 million U.S. soldiers who are working other jobs and are now being told that they need to be ready for deployment. We don't know for deployment to where or to do what, but we should start asking that question and paying close attention.
I think this is a good place to get into the surveillance, many of the private surveillance companies and how they're exploiting this situation. It's pretty clear that Bill Gates is going to be the main figure with the private global quasi-government that he set up in exploiting this. Now, Bill Gates just resigned from Berkshire Hathaway and Microsoft, which is, so MSNBC, that's Microsoft. Bill Gates has massive control over large portions of the media, which we'll get into. But he's issued several disturbing calls in recent days, actually early on in March, before the Trump administration began to publicly attempt to take this seriously. I don't know how seriously they're taking it at all. He called for a nationwide tracking system, basically intensifying surveillance. And he called for, I want to get the exact language. So I'm going to my Twitter account because I don't want to deceive anyone. And the exact language. Man, I've been tweeting a lot.
Max tweeting? I mean,
eventually we will have, this is on a Reddit question and answer session that Bill Gates did on March 13th, I think. Eventually we will have to have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently for coronavirus, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. So digital certificates for individuals. What is that?
He's not talking about something you'd get in your email and print out and take to your doctor here, is he?
I don't know. What does he mean? I mean, is he talking about chipping people? Is Bill Gates talking about chipping people with vaccines?
You laugh, but I'm trying to find an article right now.
And, there's been an effort in Sweden to chip people, to allow them to pay for items.
I think Denmark.
Maybe Denmark as well. I want to know what Bill Gates is talking about here. And then we have some disturbing videos from a private company called, sorry, I lost it somewhere. Private company called Tectonics Geo. And this company, Ben, I don't know if you want to, if you're able to play this on screen. These are like simulations that they're putting together to freak people out about the spread of coronavirus from spring break. Of course, you all saw the spring break videos of the sunburned bros, with women in bikinis doing the human centipede where they butt chug natty lights out of each other's ass cheeks on camera. And then the guy comes on and says, "We don't give a fuck about coronavirus, bro." And, the person to blame for that is Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor who refused to close the beaches down. I mean, you expect the young and the brainless to do that at spring break. That's expected. You expect, people to come out of our great charter school education system and be like that. But Ron DeSantis graduated from Harvard. He is the governor and he refused to shut down the beaches. So it's his fault. So everybody looks at spring break in Florida as the model of what went wrong with coronavirus, because the youth are doing butt chugs and then they're taking planes out and spreading the virus. So this company, Tectonics Geo, has done a simulation. This is totally fake. Like, these aren't real. It doesn't look like they actually managed to monitor everyone and show where they were going. But what they're proposing is that they be able to do that, and that everybody be under a much deeper system of surveillance because of coronavirus. So I don't know if you can show this video that we teed up here, Ben. It's highly disturbing.
Yeah. We'll cut to that in a second. Do you want to add something, and then I'll cut to that?
Well, they've also done a simulation on New York, and Anya's pulled up something about Bill Gates and his digital. There are articles. We're calling it
here, and I'll put this right now. I'll send it to you on Skype, Ben, so that you can pull it up and people believe.
So for our viewers here, I have up here. This is the company Max was talking about, Tectonics Geo, and it's want to see the true and potential impact of ignoring social distancing, and then they have this model that they did, and I'm going to play this video here in a second. So here's with the audio.
Specifically on just. We wanted to see the true footprint social gatherings like spring break beach crowds could really have on our society in the face of a global pandemic. To do so, we started with the big picture, powering our engine with billions of anonymized location data points from mobile devices across the globe. Using Tectonics, we can then zoom in on specific regions. Here, we focus specifically on just one beach in Fort Lauderdale during the month of March. Again, each of these data points shown on the map corresponds to a unique mobile device active on a given day. You can see clearly that device activity spikes during the 2-week stretch of early to mid-March corresponding with spring break. No surprise. Now, using an analysis called a spider query, we can actually track movement of these devices over the remaining weeks of March, seeing where these devices went after spring breakers left the beach. As we zoom further and further out, it becomes clear just how massive the potential impact just one single beach gathering can have in spreading this virus across our nation. It can be hard.
So that's one video from this company, Tectonic Geo, and here's the New Yorker map. So they're doing these very complex models here, very strange. Here's the other video that they posted on Twitter, and you can find these at Tectonics Geo. That's with an X at the end. So here, for people watching, here is the other clip from the other video. It says, continuing our look at social distancing
This week,
impact.
Policymakers across the country took definitive actions to enforce social distancing policies in their own states. We wanted to take a look at the real footprint that just one major metropolitan hub could have on the United States in the face of the COVID-19 crisis. We started with New York City and honed in on the epicenter of Manhattan and surrounding areas. By doing a quick spider query, we can then zoom out to the rest of the United States to see where these mobile devices traveled after this 2-week stretch. As you can see, in just 2 days following the analysis that we ran, these mobile devices traveled from New York City all the way across our country and throughout the world.
So there you can see that this company is monitoring people's movement by monitoring their cell phones. And this is, of course, a private company. And they have this crappy music, this really crappy dance music in the background, and it's like it's like you're in a what's that stupid store? I don't even remember what those stores are, whatever it is in the mall that plays that like dance music all the time. So it's like you always feel like you're in a really seedy club that sells that. Yeah, every single. Yeah. Oh, Hollister. Yeah. Anya reminded me. It's called Hollister. It's like you're watching that video, you feel like in a Hollister or something. But I mean, what they're doing is really Orwellian. I mean, that you're supposed to feel like all nice, but it's truly dystopian.
So let me just try to put that into context before we come back to Bill Gates and digital certificates. During the 1970s, Philadelphia had a right-wing Democratic mayor named Frank Rizzo, who was a high right-wing authoritarian figure, and he passed laws banning gatherings of more than 12 people in the streets, and he passed special cabaret laws for two reasons: to basically prevent Black Philadelphians from organizing, to prevent leftist Philadelphians from engaging in political protest, and to prevent LGBT Philadelphians from having gay clubs. And it took a long time to get over that legacy. But Rizzo really made it clear he didn't want large groups of people in the street. He wanted total control. This was part of the atmosphere that led to the move Standoff, first in Powelton Village in West Philly, where basically sort of a back-to-earth African-American cult, mostly African-American cult, had a armed standoff with the police, killed several police officers. 6 years later, the first Black mayor of Philadelphia, Wilson Goode, sort of a predecessor of Barack Obama in many ways, demonstrated his worth to the establishment by dropping a bomb on the top of Move's compound on Osage Street in West Philly. And so it all kind of set the stage for that. Right now, we're at a point where people cannot be in the street, where that has been achieved. And I think that it's important that people socially distance. Like, I'm fully on board with that. We need to not die en masse. But there are elements that are taking advantage of that situation to advance this kind of technology. And if and when this is all over, when this plague is over, and I hope it ends, that's not going away. So we need to start thinking about how to assert ourselves politically. And I mentioned before, Bill Gates is proposing digital certificates for everyone who gets coronavirus. I've seen that 70% of us are supposed to get it. What is that?
And also, who's going to distribute and control those certificates? Is it going to be Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation? So not only is he proposing that policy, but he's essentially saying that this private billionaire capitalist who thinks he's the king of the world and has constructed his own monarchy he's not controlled by a government. He's built this massive, basically monarchical structure, and he's like, yeah, I control international health infrastructure, and you all need to get the certificate from me.
Well, when Max brought up the certificate earlier, and I joked that he wasn't talking about something you'd get through your email, and Max joked that, is he talking about a microchip? And it sounded like something that no one would take seriously. I just want to refer to this report from Rice University, which I sent Ben via Skype, so hopefully he can pull it up. But it's an article about quantum dot tattoos, something that you've probably never heard about before. And over the last few days, Max and I, or weeks really, Max and I have fallen down the rabbit hole on some of this information and have been trying to pay special attention to the role of Bill Gates, since he's someone who is kind of revered in our culture and our media as someone who always has the answers and someone who was talking about pandemics for years. And this article on the website of Rice University talks about quantum dot tattoos holding a vaccination record. It says Rice bioengineer reveals dissolving microneedles that also embedded fluorescent medical info. Keeping track of a child's shots could be so much easier with technology invented by new Rice University professor and his colleagues. The professor, Kevin McHugh, and his team at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology say that they've developed quantum dot tags with information after they're injected as part of a vaccination. The tags are incorporated in only some of the array of needles put onto the patch, And anyway, it is a way for information regarding a child or anyone who receives the tattoo, which seems just like a weird way of saying chip. It holds their health information and can be used as a way to keep track of who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been vaccinated. And it's now being talked about as something that will be used to fight the coronavirus. This is something Bill Gates has invested heavily in.
Well, yeah, and this article that you're reading, Anya, the researcher says, quote, "The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came to us and said, hey, we have a real problem knowing who's vaccinated. So this is one of the solutions that, I mean, this was really, they're doing this in collaboration directly. They mention, this article's the Rice University article, the news and media relations of Rice University, and they're talking about working with the Gates Foundation. So what's so wild...
And it only came out in December.
Exactly, it's very recent. And what's so wild to me is if you read the way the Gates Foundation is discussed, it's discussed as if it's some kind of state institution, or as if it's the United Nations, as if it's some kind of national or international democratic institution that is accountable to its either voters, ostensibly in the case of the U.S. government, which it's not really, or in the case of the United Nations, where it's ostensibly accountable to its member states. This is neither of those. The Gates Foundation is a private foundation run by one of the two richest human beings on planet Earth.
Yeah, we don't need national surveillance. We need national health care. It could have been prevented with simple testing and very good health care and preparation. And I know that part of Event 201 was to make those preparations. None of it was implemented. But, there's some other issues we should talk about with the Gates Foundation. Its control over the media and the PR campaign that it's waging through the media. There is there are two Netflix specials. One was like this Puff series on Bill Gates. I think it's called Gates's Brain.
Inside Bill's Brain.
Inside Bill's Brain, and he's portrayed as this nerd genius. He's going to bring us not just herd immunity, he's going to bring us nerd immunity. I mean, and he's someone that we should really just worship and admire. Tries to humanize him. It's very difficult to humanize him, but it's a Puff series on Netflix, and the same, am I right? The same executive producer who made it? Well, there's another series, Pandemic, which Anya found some interesting background on.
Well, this is to preview an article that Max and I hope to bring you within the next few days, because we've just really done a lot of research on this that I think needs to be pieced together. So we're previewing that for you now. But I was reading an article in the New York Times yesterday by a reporter named Sherry Fink, who was, you probably read her article. She was inside a hospital in Brooklyn speaking about the horrific experiences of doctors and nurses, all medical professionals inside, really the dire conditions patients and our health workers are faced with at the moment. And it was horrifying article. And I wanted to just read more about the reporter, and I clicked her name and saw that she said she's the executive producer of a documentary Netflix series called Pandemic, which was released earlier this year. And she is the executive producer of this project, that I'm sure a lot of people are binge watching right now that they're home under self-quarantine. And it's all about how we are soon going to be faced with a massive pandemic, that we're due for something on the level of the 1918 Spanish flu, but with the added impact of living in the globalized world that we do now. And her solution so far put forward in this series, I haven't finished it yet. We haven't finished it, is a concept of a universal vaccine. And this is something else Bill Gates it has invested heavily in, something that he's trying to put on the market, where they're saying they've been developing a vaccine for disease X, which is the disease that will come as a pandemic, that they're developing it before it even comes. And so Bill Gates, based on the projects he's invested in, really stands to profit if any of these solutions are implemented. But Sherry Fink herself is not only a reporter, she's someone who worked on this series, but also had worked on fellowships and held positions funded by Bill Gates in the past. So he's kind of the common denominator here.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Gates is buying influence through the media at a rapid rate. 3 million to NBC Universal, 4 million to Le Monde. The Guardian has a public health section, which is entirely funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, $9 million, $1 million to Al Jazeera. I mean, I thought that their money and their funding just came out of the ground, but apparently they need stuff from Bill Gates that's probably earmarked to promote his initiatives. $49 million. $49 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the BBC's Media Action Center. So it's just a whole swath of mainstream media that's telling Bill Gates' side of the story, and he is presenting a neoliberal solution to a pandemic, which he apparently and his minions clearly saw coming.
And which they all gained to profit from. Not only saw coming, but they are the ones who are going to profit from all of this. And by the way, when I say profit, we need to keep in mind here, we're not just talking about profit in the short term. We're talking about long-term, decades-long profit, because if you think about it from the perspective, if you're a billionaire like Bill Gates, if you can create one, medicine, one cure or whatever for a disease, and then sell it for $50 a pop, $100 a pop. This is what the Trump administration has been trying to do, right? This German bio company potentially might have a cure for coronavirus, and instead of having Germany release it, Trump wanted to buy it. He offered allegedly $1 billion to try to buy this, and then the idea was to sell it for $50 or $100 a pop. Per head, that adds up really quickly. But it's not just that short-term profit. What Bill Gates is doing is he's building an entire infrastructure that ensures that not only you have the short-term profit, you have long-term profit, because you're building the entire infrastructure. It's private around your own foundation and the companies that you work with. So you're substituting government, you're substituting something that should ostensibly be accountable to voters, and of course our government is not, but ideally it should be. So instead of you're substituting that entire system and creating a private system for the long term, not the short term, the long term, when there are public health crises, that that not only will you get the short term profit, you will control how everything is distributed. You will control the entire response. So we're talking, I keep stressing this point because this is not just a make a quick buck, get rich quick scheme, right? This is like creating an entire new global public health infrastructure that is controlled by a handful of capitalist oligarchs who will make money for decades to come. That is the end game.
We have a question, and I want to toss it here to Aaron, but I do have a direct answer to this question from Chunky U 666. Respect Chunky U. And Chunky U has been a generous supporter here, so we definitely want to get a response. More and more places in Australia won't accept cash. They say due to COVID-19, the IMF want to get rid of cash to trap everyone in the banks. Any thoughts on it? And I do actually have thoughts on it. If you just go right to the IMF's website, they are calling for going cashless. It's like, they want to stimulate the brains of everyone who reads the book of Revelations and believes it to be the literal truth, and basically make them feel like the book of Revelations, which actually wasn't originally in the Bible, is true. But I did a piece, an investigative series with Alex Rubinstein, who's a friend of the Grayzone, on Pierre Omidyar, who is a major funder of various initiatives alongside USAID, United States Agency for International Development, to promote cashless, the use of digital currency and cashlessness in very poor rural areas of the global south, to ensure that poor people who use cash, who are subsistence farmers, go into debt, that they get into this debt system. And of course, Omidyar was the founder of PayPal. Aaron, you want to jump in here and respond to any questions?
Well, A big thing that stands out for me is this to me has been such a lost opportunity for some direly needed international cooperation. And, both the US and China have been using some pretty harsh rhetoric against the other. There was a Chinese official who suggested that it was the US military that might have brought in the pandemic into China, which is something that I don't think they should say unless they're going to produce evidence, and evidence that I haven't seen yet. And of course, Trump insisting on calling this the Wuhan or the Chinese virus, when meanwhile there was huge opportunities for cooperation. It's been taken for granted by the US media that China covered up the pandemic for a long time and prevented a robust US response. And looking for the evidence of that, I actually don't think that that's true. I mean, it's certainly true that there was a cover-up internally in China, and the doctor who tried to raise awareness was severely punished. He had to basically sign a false confession, which was later withdrawn, and he was recognized as being correct. So there was an initial cover-up by at least local authorities. But after that, you even have the White House admitting that on January 3rd, the CDC was informed by China about the coronavirus. So January 3rd is extremely early in this whole process, which means that we lost a huge opportunity to respond earlier, and we lost an opportunity to work with China instead of stigmatizing it and drumming up Cold War tensions. And what is one reason why that opportunity was lost? Well, the big reason is because I think something you guys have talked about a lot and covered a lot at the Grayzone is that, this crisis was an opportunity to ratchet up tensions with China and demonize it further, which has been a bipartisan goal for a long time. But also, what was happening in January in the US, that was when we were in the thralls of impeachment. And even in that report in the Washington Post recently that was used to accuse Trump of acting too late, which I think is a fair criticism. But even in there, it said that the warnings about the coronavirus from US intelligence officials were not just given to Trump, but they were given to members of Congress. And the members of Congress who sit on the intelligence community, who sit on and head the Intelligence Committee in Congress, also happen to be those who were leading the impeachment fight. So Adam Schiff, at the same time as, I presume, since he's on the Intelligence Committee, received the same intelligence that Trump got, warning about the coronavirus, which of course came from Chinese officials. At the same time as Schiff got that warning, what was he doing? He was leading this stupid impeachment thing. And for all the talk that US intelligence officials then tried to sound the alarm, but they were ignored, well, what did they do the following month, in February, when this was even worse and even more stark and even more dire? Instead of, explosive leaks saying that both Congress and Trump are ignoring the corona crisis, intelligence officials were leaking fake scandals that the Russians are interfering on Trump's behalf again, and then shortly afterwards that they're also going to interfere on Bernie Sanders. So basically, intelligence officials were more concerned with once again drumming up more fake Russia madness and Russia panic than they were in sounding the alarm about the very real panic of this corona crisis. So all of these different factors, negligence by Congress and by Trump, plus the imperatives of the national security state to drum up tensions with China and also keep fixating on Russia panic, have made this whole thing, I think, a whole lot worse.
Absolutely. Aaron, we have a comment. Anya's taking a break, but we have a comment from LW who says, Aaron is sexy. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Oh, good. Thank you, LW. Thank you.
I have no, I'm just unable to make an assessment there. I'm just completely unable to do it one way or another. But Aaron is definitely, he's a calming presence in our super chat. We have another comment. Wuhan got you all in check, and I just don't want to get accused of being Ari Melber again. Aaron earlier compared me to Ari Melber. I just want to say you will never find me in a limo driving through the streets of downtown New York with Fat Joe and woke Bill Kristol, which Ari Melber did. That's like unforgivable. I'm not even joking. Like if I ever see him, I'm going to ask him to get on his knees and atone for getting in a limo and bobbing his head with woke Bill Kristol this blood-soaked neocon chicken hawk and Fat Joe, and how the hell did Fat Joe ever become a part of that? So that's my response to Wuhan got you all in check.
Full confession, I've actually privately already made the Wuhan got you all in check joke to my friends. So whoever came up with that in the chat, great minds think alike.
Aaron, YouTube stream heartthrob from end to Fed.
All right, I think we're good with this tangent. But Max, why don't you talk about that a bit, about the lost opportunity?
Bill Crystal Meth. That was another comment.
Oh,
yes.
Bill Crystal Meth. That's pretty good.
But in terms of the evidence you've seen, Max, for China's role in this, I mean, this doctor certainly was persecuted by local authorities. But I'm wondering if you can speak to this notion of how, argued by Trump, and it's pretty much accepted across the political spectrum, that China covered this up and helped seriously undermine the U.S. ability to respond.
Yeah, I mean, great question, and it's sort of taken as gospel now. I've been reading these timelines that come out on Axios and that get shared by a lot of sort of mainstream pundits. There's an author there who's, I forget her name, Bethany Allen Abrahamian or something. She's, of course, from Johns Hopkins, so that's one of the imperial training schools here at SAIS and in Baltimore. And she does these timelines of how China covered everything up, but it misses, as you said, Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary's disclosure that China informed the World Health Organization on January 3rd, which was providing intelligence to the Center for Disease Control in the U.S. about this virus and the severity of it. So I said in my piece at Chicago Reader, yeah, China took some ham-fisted measures. Maybe they were alarmed. I've also read a number of translations of local Wuhan media reports about the virus, which were being provided to the local population. So these are always missing. What's also missing is how it wasn't only Donald Trump who was dismissing the severity of the virus and saying everything's going to be fine, we're going to be okay, because he wanted to calm the markets, because he was worried about his own reelection chances, because maybe he sincerely believed it was a joke. It was the Washington Post. It was Slate magazine in partnership with the New America Foundation, basically the think tank of the Democratic Party. It was the New York Times. It was the Atlantic bashing China for taking harsh measures. It was Ken Roth, regime change Roth from Human Rights Watch, bashing China as too authoritarian for imposing lockdowns on Wuhan, which are about to come to New York right now because they're finally starting to take this thing seriously. They were dismissing it. It was the whole political spectrum, right, left, not maybe left, maybe parts of the right were taking it seriously, but Trump and center were dismissing this. And China did, in fact, whatever they did at the beginning, China bought us time and we didn't do shit.
And one other thing too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a point on the doctor and what was clearly, I think, in denial, especially by local authorities in the beginning, that they were facing something on the scale which we now see it's become. And it's true. The doctor who initially spoke about the Wuhan virus, he was punished, he was arrested, he was forced to sign a confession, and he ultimately died of coronavirus while back after returning and fighting in order to save more lives. And he died a hero in the eyes of the Chinese government and the Chinese people at that point. Because, I mean, if you just look at what happened after 3 weeks, essentially, of talk of this virus, this mystery virus coming out of Wuhan, began surfacing after those reports began surfacing in international media in the first weeks of the new year. China was making this call to the international community about what was happening. They were also publicizing the genome, the specifics of the virus, to help research all around the world, help researchers from Australia to the United States and everywhere in between try and find a cure or more of an understanding of the virus. So it's true that China was in denial for a few weeks, but you can see a huge change in their behavior once they started taking the virus seriously. Not only did they celebrate the doctor who originally pointed out the virus was spreading, they also implemented these harsh measures. They placed 46 million people, 11 major cities under literal martial law and quarantine. And the difference is our leaders now have been not only told about this since January, since before we had reported cases here, they also are dealing with the largest outbreak in the entire world at the moment. And they've yet to make that turn that the Chinese leadership made, which you can say what you want about the mistakes made in the beginning. You can say what you want about mistakes made even by Governor Cuomo in the beginning, but even he's taking it more seriously now because he has no choice. And yet other leaders in this country who have the information that I don't even think we have, which is that this is a much more serious outbreak than we know right now, considering they're not even testing people. We don't know how many people have coronavirus or are dying of coronavirus in real time. If I wanted to find out if I had it, I wouldn't even be able to figure it out. So
it's harder to find a coronavirus test than Joe Biden.
It is. and so that's the point that I want to make as we discuss China and the mistakes China made in the beginning. Fair, but it seems as though our leaders were not only prone to those mistakes, but worse. They're turning a complete blind eye to the outbreak as it sweeps the country, as entire nursing homes, for example, as one in New Jersey is right now, are dealing with an outbreak. Think about that. I don't think we've accepted the scale of this yet, and our leaders, or really understood the inaction of our leaders.
We had a comment about banning vapes. It seems random. It's like, just seems like a random comment. That's actually a significant comment, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but just it goes back to a lot of the working hypotheses of the Chinese government, but many people are asking questions about strange flu strains that were going around in the fall. And there were a number of vaping in the summer. A number of vaping deaths, and then vapes were banned. But do we know these were vaping deaths and not flu deaths? There was a strange flu outbreak centered in Maryland, and we're hearing conspiracy theories about Fort Detrick.
Yeah, I thought maybe we could toss to Ben to discuss that a little bit more since he brought it up earlier.
Okay, and I want to get into Biden because he just had another live malfunction on Anderson Cooper just now, so I want to get Aaron's thoughts on that. But Ben, if you want to pick up on Fort Detrick, which has been a source of a lot of intrigue over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots to talk about here. I'll begin it, and then we can continue the discussion. And of course, we do want to talk about Biden and his brain being complete cottage cheese, because it's endlessly entertaining, but also it's just so insane that this is the candidate that the DNC is trying to just ram into the White House. But as for Detrick, this is pretty wild. Last year in 2019, the experimental bioweapons lab, U.S. Army lab in Frederick, Maryland, Fort Detrick, was closed under suspicious circumstances, and there were also concerns in the community that some of the weapons tests were actually hurting the health of the local community. And this is just one of many things. There are also allegations, it's not entirely known, but there are allegations that if you remember the anthrax scare, which was really weird, and now there are so many questions that still have not been answered, especially about whether or not anthrax was sent to the few senators who were considering voting against expanding the Patriot Act, just authoritarian measures, and voting for the Iraq War. There's a lot of questions there, but there are also allegations that Fort Detrick was the site of the anthrax use as a weapon research. So there are a lot of things that aren't known. And then there are some other really strange things, like last year, several months ago. Also Lyme disease. I'm glad you mentioned that. So Lyme disease, a lot of people know, but Lyme disease, people might know that it's associated with ticks, of course, with the bug, the tick. Well, what happened was the U.S. government has been experimenting with bioweapons for many decades throughout the Cold War, and specifically during the Korean War in the 1950s, which has been largely erased from U.S. history. It's also called the Forgotten War, even though 20% of Korea's population in the north were killed in that war. It was a totally brutal, basically genocidal war where the U.S. killed probably 3 million Koreans, and famously the Air Force said that there was nothing left to destroy. They just completely destroyed every building in the northern part of Korea, now modern-day DPRK, North Korea. And in that war, the U.S. also experimented with bioweapons, including the use of fleas and ticks. And that is where this is now confirmed. This is not my opinion. There are now detailed research. Even the New York Times acknowledged it. There's now detailed, confirmed research that has been declassified showing that the Pentagon was trying to weaponize ticks and spread a disease that would turn an enemy population and enemy soldiers and guerrillas and insurgents just basically into lethargic people who wouldn't resist the foreign occupation. And Lyme disease comes out of that. It is a result of this bioweapons research that got out. So there are a lot of questions to be asked. There's also a question that really has not been answered well. The head of Harvard's chemistry department was arrested several months ago, and the U.S. government accused him of giving secrets to China, and he was working in Wuhan. And also a question that has not been answered. Ironically, some of the only people who have been raising these questions are these unabashed hawks, these neocons who hate China and who support the new Cold War in China, like Tom Cotton. They've been raising the theory that this was a Chinese bioweapon that got out. Who knows? That could be that way. It also could be the other way, right? So let's keep in mind that Wuhan is not just some random city. Wuhan is a major weapons research, technology research, bio research hub, the main hub inside China. So, I'm not at all pretending that I have answers. And anyone who says they have the answers, they're obviously, they're probably trying to sell you something, or they're, maybe they've lost their mind a bit. But I think we should definitely be skeptical. And there's still a lot of questions that we should demand the answer to. And why, at the very least, why an experimental bioweapons lab closed last year should be answered. It's not just me asking that question. A senator, there was actually reports in local media in Maryland, a senator also asked for answers as to why this bioweapons lab was closed, because even aside from the geopolitical implications, the local implications are important, because this community of U.S. citizens may be facing health impacts because of experimental bioweapons research going on in their community.
Frederick, Maryland already has become a cancer cluster because of the presence of Fort Detrick. If you just go on YouTube and watch local news reports, there are citizens in Frederick who've been organizing for years and years and years to stop these bioweapons production experiments, and people have been dying, especially in nursing homes. We got a comment I wanted to address. There was a proposal to marry Anya because marriages with redheads don't last. I don't know about redheads, but, I live in the United States of America, which seems to, at this point, to be a shithole country. So if I get the COVID, keep hope alive, brother.
All right, wait, one
Anya,
second.
You wanted to say something?
Wait, 1 second. I want to jump back in for a second here. I mentioned, just so people know, just so I have the sources here, this is an article in the Military Times, which is very closely linked to the U.S. military. It's not officially an arm, but it's basically an arm of the U.S. military. And the headline, this is from August last year, 2019. Senator asking questions about Army lab shutdown. This is not just like kooky people in alternative media asking these questions. This is a mainstream U.S. military-linked media outlet. Senator asking questions about Army lab shutdown. And here's the article really quickly. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's been almost a month since the CDC shut down an Army infectious disease research lab, and a local lawmaker wants answers. Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, sent a letter on Friday to the acting Army secretary wanting to know how the shutdown of the Fort Detrick, Maryland facility will affect its ongoing work, and whether anyone was exposed to a dangerous agent as a result of the deficiencies the CDC found in a June inspection. And he said, I was disappointed to have learned of the situation through press reports rather than from the army directly, even though it happened several weeks ago. Again, this is a senator who's asking, why wasn't I informed about this? Because my constituents may have been potentially impacted, who knows, by whatever research was going on in this facility. Why was I not informed? Instead, I had to learn about this through media reports. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And again, I need to stress this point. This was something that was being discussed in mainstream media outlets last year, and it just kind of disappeared.
Yep. 100 Iranian scientists recently issued a letter, this is only in Iranian media, calling for the U.S. to shut down its bioweapons facilities and, kind of flipping the language the U.S. always uses on Iran for its nuclear facilities and, on animal Assad. So it was all, top level trolling. Anya, you wanted to say something before we change subjects?
No, I was just going to try to do just that, change the subject, because I feel like we've exhausted the Dietrich angle for now, and I see people clamoring for Aaron's take on Dementia Joe.
Oh,
yeah, listen,
fat.
Aaron,
listen, dumb.
Yeah, Aaron, Aaron, I also want to hear your take just on the Bernie campaign, on where it's at right now, because you're much more in the Bernie sphere than we are. You're more a part of that world. So also Biden and Bernie.
Yeah, we lost Aaron's audio here, so.
Oh, I'm back. Okay, no, I'm back.
The Biden campaign heard that he was about to tear into.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so I read, in terms of the Bernie campaign, I read something really depressing last week. There was a long piece in the New York Times, and these pieces are inevitable, basically already doing the post-mortem on the Bernie campaign. Although it's not over yet officially, but it's looking pretty bleak, obviously. So people are now starting to talk, and we're going to have the inevitable finger-pointing. Different factions of Bernie's apparatus will be laying the blame on each other. And this, to me, was like the opening round of that. But the most depressing part of the article was when it revealed that among the people who has been giving the campaign advice, and who they've been listening to actively, is the actor John Cusack.
What?
And John Cusack was like weighing in on strategy inside the Bernie campaign. And man. I like John Cusack he's a decent person. I think he has decent politics.
He's kind of he
means really well. And he means really well. But having interacted with him online, I also know that he's pretty kooky. I mean, him and I got in this big fight once about Russiagate because he was convinced that was a real thing. And he blocked me over it, even though he started the fight, by the way. But anyway, the point
I got to say really quickly, he blocked me and I never even engaged with him one time.
Well, there we go. So, even if he wasn't kooky about Russiagate, it doesn't really matter. The point is that this is like a presidential campaign. And to have an actor, whether that actor is really bright or not, or, I just think that it was a window to me in that Bernie has been listening to the wrong people. And, maybe there'll be another time to really dissect into all the things that went wrong. But, one aspect that I think all of us can agree on is just him withholding his fire on Joe Biden. And what a catastrophe.
Before we move away too far, I want you to talk about that, Aaron. I'll come back to you in a second. I just have to acknowledge this is like the best comment I've seen so far, not to make it a competition, but someone was clearly listening to our post and someone created an account called MSNBC Presents the Bill Kristol Show. And they wrote, Joe Biden actually represents America's last hope for sane, stable leadership, upholding the international liberal rules-based order. That is 100 points, A+ level trolling, brilliant comment. Everyone should applaud MSNBC Presents the Bill Kristol Show. That's awesome.
So Aaron, the last debate. Listen, turn on the radio. So speak to your kids.
Toss it back to him.
Did
Aaron was
Oh wait, I interrupted Aaron. We should go back to Aaron.
Well, I just wanted to ask Aaron. I mean, you were talking about Bernie going soft. What were your thoughts when Bernie was attacked by Biden in the debate, specifically on foreign policy. I mean, what were your thoughts on his performance?
Well, Bernie lost a huge opportunity there because, first of all, Biden revived this tired, Cold Warrior talking point about how Bernie had said a couple of nice things about Cuba's education programs. And, and Biden basically accused Bernie of being soft on dictatorships. Well, Bernie could have destroyed him by pointing out that really right now is literally the 5th anniversary of Biden's administration under President Obama greenlighting the Saudi invasion of Yemen. And that was a part of the Obama administration's repeated coddling of the Saudi dictatorship. I mean, in fact, I don't think you can think of an administration, for all the talk about there being tensions behind the scenes, policy-wise, I don't think you can think of an administration that has been more pliant towards and subservient towards the Saudi regime. So Bernie could have hit back Biden just on that, on top of Biden's longtime support for autocrats all around the world. But he didn't, and he let sort of Biden dictate that whole aspect, which was a huge mistake. And there was so much more, listen, at the Grayzone, there's a whole trove of material on the Obama administration's foreign policy legacy, specifically, Joe Biden, and Max, you've written about this, Joe Biden's role in Central America in implementing privatizations, and of course the Obama administration being behind the coup in Honduras that has caused so much misery in Central America and has been a major factor, probably the major factor behind the migrant crisis. But none of this comes up because Bernie is caught between, he's got so many things holding him back. He's being, obviously, his personal friendship with Biden limits him. He doesn't want to criticize Biden personally. And also, his campaign made a pretty concerted decision not to criticize the Obama administration. And I can get the calculation there because he doesn't want to alienate Obama's support base. He needs them. But on foreign policy especially, which, is less on people's minds, I think there's certainly room to criticize Obama, especially if he can get Biden on that. But he didn't. And, we're going to look back and for a long time and really be frustrated with all the lost opportunities that the Bernie campaign had.
Yes, I really think I want to emphasize your point about Bernie's deliberate, concerted, calculated refusal to interrogate the crimes of the Obama administration, from the financial crash, the bailout of the banks, to actually put that on Obama and Vice President Biden, to Libya, Syria, Honduras, all the foreign policy catastrophes, and the general refusal of Obama to stand up against Wall Street at all. And, I can understand not doing that ahead of South Carolina, maybe, but in the last debate, Bernie would only talk about Biden as a senator. And then, it became this discussion between two senators of procedural votes where Biden's like around in a gurney. It's really like weekend at Biden's. He was not taken off his block at all. So I think it was a huge lost opportunity. I don't know if they're going to debate again in April. Like, they're going to have to be in like tubes, like hazmat tubes or something, especially Biden. I've been reading that he has to speak to his family. He sits on the porch and they stand far away in the yard, and his staff comes in with N95 masks and gloves because they're afraid he'll get infected and die. Aaron, what do you think Biden's, do you think Biden will actually wind up being the nominee? I have questions about that.
Yeah, if I had to bet, could you be really confident placing your bet on Joe Biden being the actual nominee when it comes to the convention? I wouldn't take that bet at this point. He's got issues cognitively. He just had a sexual assault claim come up.
Do you believe it? Do you believe Tara Reid?
Let's not get into it.
Well, what I believe is that we should take, believing women seriously and at minimum investigate their assault claims. This was the whole lesson of Me Too and the movement. But we learned from reporting in The Intercept this week that, in fact, Me Too, the organization, declined to take up Joe Biden's accusers' cause because they said that they can't take up an allegation against a candidate. And of course, the founder of Me Too, or a high-ranking official, also works for Joe Biden, right?
Anita Dunn.
Yeah.
She's his comms director.
Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile,
I would just say that women, it's not a surprise to anyone that the Me Too movement was not there to service this one individual who came forward with the Biden allegation. The Me Too movement was never about acknowledging women. It was about Megyn Kelly and Gretchen Carlson quitting Fox News because they were sexually harassed, and actresses essentially sleeping with directors to get roles, and then in some cases directors actually raping women. But it was never about actual working women in small offices or in retail jobs or in industry jobs such as the restaurant industry or the hotel industry who are sexually abused and assaulted.
DSK and the maid.
Right. Dominique Strauss-Kahn, you remember, the former head of the IMF, raping the hotel maid. One friend of mine at the time made the joke that he was only doing to a woman what the IMF does to countries, but not only to minimize it, but just drawing a parallel between the IMF and rape. But that was just the point I wanted to make about Me Too. I mean, Me Too ignored plenty of women, and I think it's a shame.
And they never talked
organization to begin with.
And they never Epstein. I mean, I swear I'm not gonna turn this into 20 minutes about Epstein, but Epstein came later, like involved in a disgusting child sex ring, and how Epstein, who was clearly working with intelligence agencies, was using this as blackmail against all of these elites. That didn't come out until later. So, I mean, I always bring this up like randomly because it's just like the biggest rabbit hole ever. But it's just like, I got Epstein brain, man. All that stuff, it just blew my mind how insane. Like, it just goes so deep. Don't forget, many meetings with Bill Gates. They were close friends, Epstein and Bill Gates. Of course, Bloomberg had 6 phone numbers in Epstein's black book, and there are photos of Bloomberg with Ghislaine Maxwell, who was procuring young women for the trafficking ring. And then let's bring it back to Biden for a second, because I don't want to get too deep into this. But what I will say, the final thing I was going to add is anyone I invite, I'm not going to show the videos because they're too creepy, but anyone watching this, look up, there are hours of video clips of Joe Biden touching women, including little girls, again and again and again. It is so disgusting. And I gotta say, the fact that only like the right wing has been talking about that, because the Democratic Party, they pick someone who can't stop touching little girls, smelling their hair. There are videos of him like fondling like 12-year-old girls who don't even have breasts yet, like where they're going to grow breasts. It is disgusting. And that has not even been discussed yet. And if you don't think Donald Trump is going to talk about that, you're on Bill Crystal meth.
And meme.
Yeah. Donald Trump had the meme of Biden coming up behind a woman. But, I mean, what Biden says to the girls, he's like, don't date any boys till you're 30. And he says it to them again and again and again. And, he has a psychosexual disorder. Okay. He has some weird, like how Mike Pompeo gets titillation from starving brown people to death. Joe Biden has a psychosexual disorder with sniffing and touching girls. It's very clear from these videos. I've heard he's a very nice man from people who've worked with him, but this is going to come back to haunt him along with
he sounds
Burisma.
like Bernie Sanders. He's a very good man.
My friend Joe Biden. Okay.
I'm sure people think he's a nice person.
I've asked a lot of
people who say he was a molester, so.
He looks like a molester.
He does it on camera. He's molested little girls like 80 times on camera.
Yeah, so I ask people about this, and I'm like, have you watched the videos? And they're like, yeah, I've seen some clips here and there. Like Bernie people, like hardcore Bernie people, who don't also, by the way, and Aaron, if you want to add anything on this, the Bernie people had never said shit about Burisma. It's like they're afraid to talk about Ukraine, which is all we're going to hear about if Biden gets in there. It's all we're going to hear about is Ukraine, and it's real. It's fucking real. So there's the molester, girl-touching, psychosexual freak show, and Burisma with Hunter Biden, who, the New York Times tried to reinvent. They had a profile of him as a sensitive artist. This is a guy who was like having personal assistants fetch him dildos in the Hustler VIP room, smoking crack.
Not Hustler, Archibald's, a strip club.
Archibald's is on
K Street.
K Street. It's a local haunt here in DC I've never been to. Anyway, this is all stuff that's going to come out, and the Bernie campaign didn't want to touch it. Now they're on Tara Reid. It seems like very well may be true, but it seems like a Hail Mary after they missed all these opportunities. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ben. I want to make one last point.
Didn't you toss it to Aaron?
Let me say about
go ahead.
Let me say about that quickly.
Love the sound of my voice so much.
Biden gave Bernie and everybody else such an opportunity not that long ago when he was interviewed by the Today Show, and the interviewer asked him, "Well, don't you think it looks a little sleazy that your son got this $80,000 a month gig while you're running point in Ukraine? I mean, why do you think Hunter got this job?" And Joe Biden literally said, this is a direct quote, he said, "Because he's a really bright guy." Okay? That's what Joe Biden said. And so you could have run that clip on repeat over and over and over and hammered him. But nobody did, as you say, Max. Nobody did. Everyone decided it was untouchable. And all that did was help pave the way for Joe Biden to get the nomination, and then pave the way for Trump to use that in his attacks on him. Because, Bernie can ignore it, but Trump certainly will not. And it is, it's going to hurt. It's not going to, on top of all the other liabilities that Biden has, including being associated with the same Obama-Clinton legacy that got Trump elected in 2016. So it's like, it's a setup for a huge failure. And in terms of lost opportunities for Bernie, I'm curious what people think about how the Bernie campaign is handling this coronavirus crisis, because if there's ever a time that is a living, real argument for Bernie's agenda, it's right now, where people are getting $35,000 bills from their insurance companies for getting treated for the coronavirus. Hospitals don't have basic equipment. We've all seen the pictures of hospital workers having to put garbage bags instead of having protective equipment. So if it's ever an argument right now for Bernie's entire agenda, it's this. But, is Bernie sufficiently capitalizing? Bernie could have, for example, and a few of us have talked about this, including Crystal Ball, Bernie could have mobilized his whole movement, which is, under the mantra that he often repeats about being willing to fight for someone you don't know. Well, this is the perfect time to fight for someone you don't know. Maybe he could have signed people up to deliver groceries, or at least to buy groceries for people who can't go out and buy groceries themselves. Do things that the federal government is not doing because we lack such basic social infrastructure. Bernie, with his agenda and his movement, could have filled the void, but I haven't seen that. So from Biden to even this coronavirus, there's just lost opportunities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And before I want to respond to that, but I just got to say one thing before we move away from Hunter Biden. One of the funniest things is that Donald Trump Jr. challenged Hunter Biden to a debate, having a debate of Biden's son and Trump's son, like the two candidate sons, a son's debate. I got to say, we should all root for that. We need a debate between Hunter Biden and Donald Trump Jr. It would be just for the entertainment value. It would be so funny.
I hope Donald Trump Jr. doesn't use like a punchline like that Joe Biden will do to America what his son did to his dead brother's wife.
Oh. But anyway, I don't know. I got to say, Hunter Biden, that guy is real. Whatever you want to say, like
Ben?
No, he's obviously extremely corrupt. But no, I just want to say, in the debate, Donald Trump Jr., this is another guy who's been practicing social distancing his entire life. And I think he would get destroyed. I think it would just be solely for the entertainment value. I'm rooting for that debate. But anyway, and on a serious note, to answer the question that Aaron had, I've been saying the same thing. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Look, we have to be able to acknowledge that Bernie has opened up a lot of doors. He's done a lot of good things. But I think he, especially in the past month or so, the past several weeks, he has not been serious about winning. In the last debate, I don't think he was serious about winning. And if you're going to run against the entire corporate media, against the DNC, against Wall Street. You have to want to win more than anything. And I'm afraid he doesn't have what it takes, because he made the decision. And I say this as someone, Bernie's far from perfect, but I like a lot of the things that he's done, and his movement has been so important. But he made the decision that I can't go for Biden's throat in the debate. We're not going to criticize Biden aggressively because Biden is probably going to be the candidate, and we don't want to hurt Biden's candidacy and then be accused by the DNC and all of its lackeys in the media of supposedly being the wreckers who prevented Biden from being president and helped Trump win again. You have to be able to make the break. You have to go that extra step. And he was afraid of taking that step. So what he's doing is essentially, what he's doing is...
All along, that's not what he was going to do.
Well, what he did is he just handed victory to Biden. So, but on that note, though, I think that this moment that we're in right now, I think that we're in uncharted territory. Let's be honest here. I think these social distancing these measures are going to be continued for weeks, if not months. And I think it's very clear the rest of the primary is going to be delayed, if not outright canceled. It was completely not only negligent, not only a bad move, it was criminal for the DNC to hold those primaries at a time when they were probably, there are some reports, they help spread coronavirus. There could be people who die because the DNC decided...
Misinformation.
Go ahead, what, Max?
Biden spread misinformation and said, if you're not showing symptoms, come out and vote. And you cannot be showing symptoms for 2 weeks
and still
with
spread coronavirus
and spread it to people. So that's criminal.
It's absolutely criminal. So it was criminal for the DNC to do that. Now they're probably going to delay, if not cancel the rest. And let's be honest, on MSNBC, they've already been floating the possibility of canceling the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee. So it's very likely that they're going to cancel it. So we're in uncharted territory here. So I'm actually glad that Bernie didn't drop out. But this is the moment. Bernie has been handed the opportunity of a lifetime. There is a massive pandemic. The political system is failing the entire country. Millions of people could die, and the only solution is a massive change in public health infrastructure, the creation of universal health care, a Medicare for all style system, a massive bailout for the American working class, the creation of, for once, paid sick leave. The U.S. is one of the only countries in the world for all of these social democratic reforms that Bernie Sanders wants. He should be every day on TV saying, this is the moment, we need all of these reforms. You used to say they were too radical. It's actually too moderate. It's too ridiculous. It's too radical to not want these mechanisms because millions of people are going to die. What's the actual radical position is saying, millions of old people have to sacrifice their lives at the author of capitalism, of this insane neoliberal system, so the economy with a capital E, as if it's some god, the economy can get better. No, what we need are these measures that Bernie Sanders has been wanting. And where is he? He is giving speeches, but he really needs to show leadership, and he needs to say, honestly, screw the DNC, screw this rigged system. I'm going to act as if I'm president because no one else is exercising leadership. This is the moment where we need a reverse shock doctrine. 1 second, I'm almost done. We need a reverse shock doctrine because for decades, the U.S. government, the CIA, all these corporations, Wall Street have been pushing a neoliberal shock doctrine. Anytime there's a crisis, we have to privatize. We have to cut social services. For the first time, we should have a left-wing shock doctrine. This is the opportunity, and not just Bernie Sanders, but his movement. The people who support Bernie Sanders, his movement, they need to get behind this opportunity and say that if you don't support this program, you are the ones who are radical, not us. I'm done.
I think everyone agrees that, I definitely agree with you, Ben, that Sanders had this opportunity and he squandered it because he is a Democrat. He says that he's going to endorse and campaign for the eventual nominee. And the reason why he hasn't taken a very strong stance on anything for several weeks, if not months at this point, is because it's been that long since he had any clear path to winning the nomination. And at this point, the race is over. I know a lot of diehard Bernie fans want to say that there's still a chance. Well, I just don't think that you're based in reality if you think that
Anya, if I could...
it's not over. Yeah, it's true. I don't think. Wait. Let me just keep going. They see. I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, Anya, no. In response to that, Anya, I want to hear your thought. Can you respond to this question, Anya? I agree with you. If you look at it, if you're Nate Silver and you just look at it from a perspective of like whatever, these are the states that are left, and from the perspective of the primary that Bernie doesn't really have a chance of winning, but we're in uncharted territory. The convention is probably going to be canceled. The DNC is just going to anoint someone. So I actually think that this is actually the only possibility. Bernie could step into that void and be like,
Sanders is not going to be the nominee if that happens. They're just going to. There's no way the Democratic Party is.
Which is why he has to fight against the DNC, which he's refused to do that.
But he won't. And you said if Sanders is going to run a campaign against the DNC and against Wall Street and against the media, well, he didn't run that campaign. He did not run against the media. He did not run against the DNC. He ran against Wall Street. That's what he's been doing for decades. But and that's why myself and other people such as Anya Parampil have been saying that if Sanders had gone Trump throughout this race, we may have seen a different result. If he actually did attack the media instead of essentially folding to them on the Russia issue, for example, when he, first of all, introduced the Russiagate argument against himself at a debate when he tried to blame the existence of people like David Cleon on Russia and said that if there were people saying mean things online, it's probably because Russia's trying to divide us. And then a few days later, that story pops up in the Washington Post. And he says, Putin is going to know who's in charge when I'm in the White House. That to me was totally pathetic, as was most of his campaign. I'm sorry to say, I heard everything he said that I agreed with and that I liked about his campaign in 2016. And I heard it for years before then when he would call into the Tom Hartman program every Thursday. He was not running a campaign to win this time. I don't know. We can get into that another time. The point is, they're not going to let Sanders take over the nomination, even if Biden isn't the one. They'll draft Andrew Cuomo out of New York and say that he's been the hero of the coronavirus response or something like that. They'll go back to Buttigieg. They'll go back to Amy Klobuchar, probably not Buttigieg. But I just wanted to turn to our super chat because someone first asked about La Riva Peltier 2020. That, of course, is the ticket put forward by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Actually, just the other day, my little brother, who's a voter in Michigan, was talking to me on the phone, and he was complaining about the fact that he did not want to vote for Trump or Biden in November. So who should he vote for? And I said, well, if you really don't want to vote for either candidate, I don't blame you. I always talk to people like this because my vote doesn't count anyway in D.C. So I feel like I'm talking to someone with a privilege when I speak to someone in Washington. But I said, well, if you feel that way, then you should look at the PSL. And of course, we started this broadcast by giving a shout out to Loud and Clear. Brian Becker is a good friend of ours. So is Eugene Perrier. They just launched Breakthrough News, which I encourage all of our supporters to follow because I think they do great work. And of course, the most important thing that the PSL and the Answer Coalition does is whenever there's a national mobilization against a war in this country, and if there is a national mobilization and you're hearing about protests in Boise, Idaho, or Alabama and Georgia, Washington, D.C., New York, you'll always see those yellow signs printed out by the Answer Coalition. They're really the only organization that has a national presence that's able to turn out hundreds of people, if not thousands all over the country. No other organization is really capable of that. So that's why I just wanted to give a shout out to the PSL since one of our chat members brought it up. Anyway, someone else, Chunky U666, who I think we spoke with earlier in the night as well, asked if we've ever seen The War on Democracy by John Pilger. What did I think? And I'll get to the second part of your question afterwards. Yes, I've watched that movie. I watched it when I was in high school or maybe a little in my late teens, and it was a really formative documentary for me. It was part of the reason why I wanted to become a journalist. John Pilger as a reporter is probably my greatest inspiration as a journalist, because I've watched almost all of his documentaries and he has tackled every single issue, big picture issues, whether he was one of the first reporters to talk about, for example, sweatshops and the emerging global economy and the way the United States was exporting its corporations and exploiting labor around the world, these really dystopian realities that we've seen come to be. He, decades ago, was breaking down those issues, and now he's such a great defender of Julian Assange, and he's one of the few veterans of this profession who's stayed true and independent and is so admirable, and I just can't say enough positive things about John Pilger. So to respond to your comment about the war on democracy, that's what I had to say. As for your question whether or not Ben is wearing contact lenses or if his eyes are really that blue, they are really that blue. That's why he's been referred to by some as the blue-eyed news Jesus.
Yeah, we actually had someone write to our public email and ask if blue-eyed news Jesus Ben Norton is available. I really, after Ben's last manifesto that he delivered, I'm ready to start the Benvolution. Maybe he can step in for Biden, in the what is it going to be, the 2022 election? I mean, I don't even know when we're going to have an election. I also wanted to say RIP to Truthdig. It's a publication I've written for a lot over the years. Bob Scheer, the legendary left-wing journalist, longtime columnist for the LA Times, former editor of Ramparts, launched it. And its publishers, Wade Kaufman, killed it. The website is offline. Everybody's been laid off in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. And it's another blow to the kind of like progressive media. Remember when progressive was the word that everyone used to encompass everything from left to liberal? And like Howard Dean was out there representing the left wing of he was out there saying, I represent the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. And people were like, oh yeah, I'm going to give my life for Howard Dean. I'm going to sell my bicycle for democracy. And there was that period in the mid-2000s when I was first getting into online media, and all of these, there's this plethora of places to write for that would pay you like $150 to $300 to do journalism, and it would affect people and get really big on social media, which was just starting at the time. Alternet was another one, and the Grayzone was launched through Alternet. Alternet was killed. Alternet is dead. It's owned by Raw Story, which is a Democratic Party click farm.
Troll farm.
It's kind of like a troll farm.
Kind of like a Russian.
And the Real News, which Ben and Aaron were both associated with, and I've been a friend of the Real News for years, seems to have been gutted. Its leadership, Paul Jay and Paul Jay has basically been pushed out for whatever reason. I don't really know exactly what the reason was, but another friend of ours who had been there for many years has just left because of Paul's departure. Aaron, what's going on with progressive media? I mean, it seems like it's a very open field. It's sort of like it's like they've been put into quarantine. They don't exist anymore. Why did they die? Do you think Russiagate had anything to do with this?
Russiagate played such a critical role. It became a fault line where basically it was handed down that to oppose Donald Trump, you had to embrace this chauvinist, jingoistic, moronic conspiracy theory that Trump conspired with Russia. And if you didn't, then that was outside the pale. It was, it means you were not allowed into acceptable spaces. So that's why those of us who didn't go along with this had to fight to get our dissenting and, of course, totally vindicated perspectives on the air. And you can go through the different outlets why it appealed to different places. I mean, overall, I do think the fact that it was just people were told that this was the way to oppose Donald Trump, and there was just a lack of political sophistication and just really thinking as to A, whether or not this was based on facts, and B, whether or not this was a smart approach to challenge Donald Trump. All that went out the window for different reasons. Then you get more into the center, and you have, outlets that are like Think Progress that have always been aligned pretty much officially with the Democratic Party, which has always been pretty hawkish when it comes to Russia, except for, you can look at President Obama personally. You can point out instances where he didn't quite go along with the consensus, like, for example, when he didn't want to send arms to Ukraine after helping to set off the proxy war there. But so pretty much you have, at traditionally liberal sites, it pretty much entrenched, chauvinist, Cold War mindset. But the sad part,
it implanted it. It didn't entrench it. It also took people who used to challenge institutions like the CIA and made them fans of it.
Totally.
Yeah. And also, can you talk about the Civil War at The Nation, where you have, kind of written a column? I mean, there's elements at The Nation that have actually tried to destroy the publisher, Katrina vanden Heuvel, because her husband is our preeminent, greatest Russian scholar, Stephen Cohen, and you've felt the pressure there. So it's happening in all progressive institutions.
Yeah, what's interesting about The Nation magazine is that Katrina was basically attacked for being a real publisher. A real publisher at a real progressive site allows debate and allows dissenting opinions and allows the readers to make up their own minds. And what Katrina did is she was committed to, journalism and open discussion. So she allowed, all sides, even perspectives that I don't think she personally agreed with when it comes to Russiagate. So, you have a lot of their top columnists and correspondents who went along with it and pushed the official narrative. And then a little bit of space was given to people like myself and Professor Stephen F. Cohen, the top Russia scholar who, shouldn't have to fight to be published anywhere. I mean, he's brilliant, and so many of us have relied on him for his expertise. And also James Carden and a few others. We published our dissenting opinions, and basically, I thought it was great. I didn't mind that they were publishing stuff that I thought was idiotic, because I trust in the readers to make up their own mind. But it has caused internally at The Nation a lot of grief, and there was, you've had people calling Professor Cohen a Putin apologist and attacking him for going on Tucker Carlson, applying standards to him that I don't think they would apply to anybody else, certainly not to themselves. And so it's been sad. But Katrina, to her credit, has withstood all of this, and I think been very gracious and generous to people that have been, to her face and behind her back, not been so gracious. So, that's just one place. And, and then you go to the...
Wait, let me cut in a little bit just with another question, because this is another point you've made. It relates to coronavirus. Rachel Maddow recently spoke out against misinformation being spread about coronavirus. She is one of the leading purveyors of conspiratorial misinformation and disinformation for the past 3 years. Do you think that when people look at what MSNBC has become, or CNN, which have been pushing this phony collusion narrative and Russiagate hysteria, that these institutions have discredited themselves as credible sources on anything, so people are less inclined to believe factual information they might present on coronavirus?
Yeah, that's been my big concern. When I saw someone like Chris Hayes, put out during the coronavirus crisis a lot of factual information, my immediate worry was that a lot of people are just not going to take him seriously, given the fact that on his show about just over a year ago, he was airing stuff like having on Jonathan Chait, speculating that Trump has been a Russian asset since 1987. So I think a lot of people... Malcolm Nance, all these crazy kooks. So yeah, we'll never know for sure because, it's a moot point now. But yeah, we'll never know how many people would have otherwise been more possibly willing to entertain the fact that Trump screwed up their response and that this pandemic was something to take more seriously, because they couldn't believe it now that the same people who told them that Russia controls our government are now warning us about it. And so it's one example where all this madness about Trump, and even now we're seeing it during the coverage of the coronavirus crisis, where, the other day, Trump answered a question from reporter Peter Alexander of NBC News, and he said to him, "You're a terrible reporter." And everybody played the clip back. And the way they played it back, they actually misrepresented what Trump was responding to. They made it seem as if he was like dismissing the reporter for asking him whether Americans should be scared, when in fact the reporter had asked Trump whether Trump had given Americans a false sense of hope, which I think is a fair question. But even in how they portrayed Trump here, they did it dishonestly, which just leads to undermine people's confidence in the media and keeps people siloed even more. And so it's a lost opportunity. And, just to finish on the tangent about Russiagate, I mean, again, we've talked about this a lot, but it's worth repeating that outlets that should know better, so for example, I get that at Mother Jones and at The Nation magazine, there's an imperative to cater to liberal voices and liberal narratives, whatever they are. But at places like Democracy Now! And The Intercept, which are, adversarial sites, aren't accountable to, to boards of directors and have relative independence, that for them to have gone along with Russiagate too, with the exception of Glenn Greenwald, I think has been hugely destructive for the broader left, because it's helped set this tone where even the adversarial sites, even those who are normally pushing back, are going along with it. And that's made it easier for whatever happened at Truthdig, for the brave people at Truthdig, like Chris Hedges and Lee Camp, for them to be attacked, because having a dissenting opinion on things like Russiagate or the Syria proxy war becomes that much more dangerous when nobody else is backing up, except for those of us at the margins. So Truthdig is unfortunately a casualty of this environment, and it's a tragedy.
We've been going on almost 2 hours here, so I think we should start thinking about wrapping up. I wanted to turn to our comments because I saw some pop up along the way that were, I think, worth addressing. And this is the last comment that I'll make, because someone did bring up the crisis of capitalism and the fact that this economic system is being more expense right now. And I think that's a good way for me to introduce just a few points about what happened this week regarding the economy, and particularly a decision by the Federal Reserve on Monday to step in and say that for the first time in its history, it was going to buy stock, direct stock in corporations. And it implemented the other measures, which included steps that it had taken in 2008 in order to address the crisis, the economic collapse we experienced at that point, spurred by the mortgage crisis. But this new step, actually buying direct stock, those other measures are buying mortgage-backed securities, buying debt, private debt owned by individuals, such as mortgages or auto loans, things like that. But now they actually have also said they're going to step in and buy stock in corporations. And the reason that that's so important is because not only has it never happened before in the history of the Federal Reserve, but it also is very relevant when you think about the fact that the coronavirus outbreak will likely lead to the collapse of entire industries and corporations that we took for granted and were doing pretty well until just a few weeks ago, including the airline industry or the cruise industry or Boeing, for example. These corporations, which some of them were already in trouble and probably looking for a government bailout, but now are absolutely going to be in trouble even if they were doing well, and are absolutely looking for a government bailout. And they're not only going to get the bailout, it seems in this case, for the first time in the history of our country, the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, is going to own direct stock in U.S. corporations. So chew on that for a minute. Ask yourself what that means. Ask yourself which corporations are going to be owned by the U.S. government when all of this is said and done. What does that say about our economic system? Because some people will say it's socialism. That's not socialism if the companies are still privately managed and if the production lines and all of that are still privately managed. It's fascism. So that's just a point that I wanted to make, since someone did bring up the crisis of capitalism and the fact that it's being propped up. It is being propped up. It's going to be propped up by our tax dollars. And we should all be very aware of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah.
And in closing, I mean, we're going to wrap up here, but if there's anything final you want to say.
Well, I just want to respond. I mean, there's so many comments, and thank you to everyone who's been commenting over the past nearly 2.5 hours. This has been a great stream. We hit so many topics. Of course, if you want to check out what we were talking about at the beginning with coronavirus, now we've been talking mostly about the U.S. election. Someone Carl Knight asked in the super chat, I want to respond. Thank you so much, Carl, for the donation. Carl asked, granted, your criticisms of Sanders are valid, but how do you feel about his supporters? I think they are some of the most socially conscious people I've ever met. Supporters of the other candidates pale in comparison. I absolutely agree. And this is something that I've always been careful to do. Look, Bernie Sanders is not perfect, but it's true. I think that he's been in some ways very important and impressive in some ways. I don't think he went far enough in challenging the Democratic Party because he wasn't serious about winning, I don't think, at the end of the day, and he didn't want to be accused by the party of being the spoiler. I'm getting there, yeah. But the movement itself, I've always been careful to make clear that, regardless of my criticism of Sanders, his movement is the best thing about him. The best thing is he says it himself in his interviews that he wants to be organizer in chief. And he recognizes that the only way that many of his left-wing policies could be implemented is through massive protest, people in the streets, lobbying from the ground up as opposed to lobbying from Wall Street and large corporations, which is how the system normally works. So I think that his movement is the most important thing about the Bernie campaign. And I hope that if Bernie's not the candidate, and we'll see, who knows what's going to happen, but, the DNC has really stolen this race. And I hope that the Bernie campaign, the movement behind him, will continue moving in the future, moving forward, fighting for things like Medicare for all, fighting for things like the abolition of ICE, and fighting against sanctions, regime change wars. I don't think his movement has emphasized this enough, but I know a lot of people in this movement, and they agree with us on a lot of political issues. So I think it's been one of the most important things in U.S. politics, in really since the Occupy movement. In some ways, it's better than the Occupy movement. So absolutely, I think it's important to emphasize the importance of his movement and not just Bernie as the individual.
Yeah, I think there is a special role that, Bernie's people in the movement around Bernie who chanted "Not me, us" can play going forward that goes beyond sort of an electoral campaign. And I'll close out by talking about that. This is a moment when a lot of people are thinking about their own mortality and the mortality of people close to them. And, we have to think about many of the people who have already basically been killed off, who've died excess deaths because of the consensus in Washington, especially people abroad. It was, under IMF and U.S. control that 3 to 5 million Russians, the old and the poor who lost their pensions, who lost everything when the Soviet Union collapsed, died during the 1990s. But I was born in 1977. I moved to D.C. with my family in 1985. And it's when I started really, because I was 7 years old, I started to become politically conscious. And I noticed the streets filling with homeless Vietnam veterans and people who were had mental issues. And that was because this giant betrayal of Americans was playing out in real time with Ronald Reagan basically declaring that anyone who was not violent, who was being held in a publicly funded mental health facility should be let go. And the homeless problem exploded. The homeless crisis exploded. And it's now out of control. DC has more homeless people per capita than any other city. It's also the most gentrified city in the country, where we are right now. In the 1990s, in 1993, Bill Clinton passed NAFTA, another gigantic betrayal of the American worker, and helped create this crisis where our supply chain is no longer controlled domestically. It helped lead, then, he ended welfare as we know it, took many poor people and working people, single mothers off the welfare rolls. In the 2000s, we started to see under George W. Bush, who started this massive graduation of wealth to the upper classes through tax cuts, and had wanted to put Social Security on the stock market, basically let you gamble your Social Security away. We started to see the mass die-off in Middle America. Then we saw the financial crash, home foreclosures. Then in the 2010s, people becoming addicted to opioids and dying off. In West Virginia, which is not very far from here. You have Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat whose daughter is a pharmaceutical lobbyist who's lobbying for the companies that are killing West Virginians in droves. And the public health care system has been absolutely ravaged. As we speak right now, Andrew Cuomo, who's being hailed as this hero, is trying to cut $400 million in Medicaid. He has presided, along with George Pataki and other governors, over the reduction of hospital beds by 20,000 in New York. So we've just witnessed this mass betrayal. And my point is that the system that the U.S. has tried to export at the barrel of a gun to countries across the world has always been here. And now we are experiencing it in the same way that many countries who've experienced invasions, coup plots, proxy wars like Syrians. We have a special guest, Zelda. This is our cat, Zelda.
That's why you saw me run off screen and make some. She was interacting with us a lot, so I thought you guys would want to say hi to.
So hi to Zelda. So I was just building to a point, which is that Donald Trump is now preparing another massive betrayal, and it's not just a betrayal. It's kind of like. It's like post-birth midlife abortions of the American workforce, where he has said that he wants to send everyone back to work as we're dying. And who's dying? It's the same demographic of people who died under US and IMF control in Russia, the elderly and the poor. And they're fine with that. Elderly will be off Social Security. They'll be off the pension rolls. Poor will be off the welfare rolls. It seems like they're just fine with that. And so what rights do people have, and how can they assert them at this point? They can't assert rights as voters if Joe Biden, weekend at Biden's, is the opponent to Trump, but they can assert them as workers. And I think the organized Bernie movement, which grows out of Occupy, can make a real statement and an intervention and generate a real resistance, the kind of resistance we need, where people assert themselves as workers through a general strike. Yellow vests, I looked online, they cost $5.99. We need a yellow vest movement in the US. We need to figure out how and when we can get into the streets, because I really do think we have to take coronavirus seriously. We shouldn't just go out and die, but we should also think about a modality for mass national political protest, because people are going to be killed by this president and the bipartisan consensus.
Yeah,
and Zelda is the real intelligent host here. We're hearing from Pat Ryan. I fully concur.
And there's one comment I was going to make, or talking about the Bernie movement. I think some of the people in the Bernie movement who I agree with 100% when it comes to strategy moving forward, the guys in Chapo, there's this thing they talk about, the Menaker pledge, where Will Menaker said, if Bernie's not the candidate, it's Bernie or bust. We're going to refuse to support the DNC. In fact, we're going to actively work for the destruction of the DNC. I think that is the correct, that's my view. I think that the DNC is the enemy. It has made it clear they're not going to allow a fair election. They're completely beholden to Wall Street. There is no democratic legitimacy with a small d in any way. And the path forward is building an alternative to that. And that's been, many people have been saying that for many years, but it's just so clear beyond any stretch of a doubt at this point. And what I really hope is that a lot of people in the Bernie movement now, they can't just get behind Biden and just eat crap the rest of their lives. They need to say, we're done with this unaccountable, undemocratic, right-wing party that is acting to the right of the Republicans during this moment of extreme crisis. We're done. It's it.
Yeah. So are there any comments we want to respond to before we close off? We have one. Good night to everyone except for Vanessa Bereitzer, who denied bail to Julian Assange. And, that's the judge. And we know very little about this judge who's denied bail to Julian Assange for jumping. He himself is in jail for jumping. It's the phoniest thing ever. But she's obviously just controlled by the U.S. and UK national security state. We know very little about this judge. There's been very little reporting on it. Jonathan Silva Cuba says, send 120 doctors to my country, Italy. Cuba sent 120 doctors to my country, Viva Cuba. Well, yeah, not only does Cuba have a fantastic literacy program where, according to the U.S. Department of Education, the city of Miami, the base of the right-wing Cuban regime change mafia has illiteracy rate. Cuba also is doing heroic things around the world that Bernie Sanders shouldn't be afraid to commemorate.
I just did a segment at the Grayzone about the heroic work of Cuban doctors if you would like more info, but I think we should move to wrap.
All right, well, I just want to say...
Because if I leave it up to them, I think they'll both just keep going the whole night.
Yeah, well, we should respond to a few more super chat comments. I mean, everyone's comments are awesome, but there are some super chat people that we really wanted to respond to. So really quickly here, wrapping up, thank you to JC Nell. Thank you to El Prince Capone. They put a noose around your neck and then blame you for choking. That's true. Thank you to Dem Truths. Thanks to Elizabeth Marino. Thanks to Melissa Petrovich. And here's a comment from Isaac Soto promoting the CPUSA. Look, I got to say on the CPUSA, it's too long to get into. I'm not going to get into it now, but the CPUSA always endorses the Democratic Party. Come on, what are you doing? The CPUSA endorsed Hillary Clinton. You call yourselves communists? What are you doing? This is ridiculous. So not to discount there are some good people who do good work, but I mean, it's not serious. Thank you to MI5 Mission. Thanks to Gillian Morrison. And here's a comment, Jay Tolley. Punch Biden. I will. He's a lecher. Why is Bernie backing off? I took my Bernie sign down because of why Bernie... Yeah. Yeah, I don't...
Joe Biden said about hitting women, we are against elder abuse except sometimes when it's okay.
Yeah, he said something.
Yeah,
like that.
we're against
okay,
elder
we have,
abuse. Only proverbial punches.
Thank you.
Oh, and we should say, since people are commenting, we didn't diss Aaron. He had to be somewhere. He had to leave, so that's why you're not hearing Aaron.
He had a quarantine date.
Thank you to Glory Jones, who says Bernie messed up the moment he let Cap Light affiliates into his campaign team, referring to the Center for American Progress. And, you know, that's very true. One of them was Matt Duss, who I've known for many years and was at Cap and Think Progress. And I asked Matt at a public event about Bernie basically Russiagating himself when he was accused of being like a vehicle for Russian meddling in the U.S., Russian active measures. And Matt's response was, we looked at the intelligence and we found it very convincing. So you, as Bernie's top foreign policy advisor, found it very convincing that Bernie is a Russian Trojan horse. That's great. That's exactly the kind of people I would want around. Do we have any more?
In terms of super chat, we have, oh man, Max, you got to respond to this. John Doe. Did you see that?
I was trying not to. But...
These are just more marriage proposals. Apparently, everyone in this chat, all the commenters want to get married to some of the other Grayzone people, but not me. But it's okay. I don't need to get married to any of you. I'm fine.
It's okay. You're blue-eyed news Jesus.
All right. So can we? So in closing, just thanks to everyone who's following this, who's supporting us. I mean, we talked about the death of progressive media. That's why I started the Grayzone to cover subjects and do reporting that really isn't allowed anywhere else, in many places. And we're able to do it. The site is doing things that we couldn't do elsewhere because of all of you. So, I mean, I really want you to feel like you're a part of this. Ben, I don't know if there's anything you want to say, but I hope that we can come back for another live chat next week and that I'm not, coughing up blood.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up here. One comment, a lot of people were saying, and just going to mention this, a lot of people were saying, pointing out that there is another candidate, there are two candidates running, Gloria La Riva and Leonard Peltier, and this is a really interesting candidacy, not only because it's a third-party option for people who are interested from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, but also what's interesting about the PSL race is that Leonard Peltier, who's running as the running mate VP, Leonard Peltier is a political prisoner. He's a Native American revolutionary who has been in prison for decades, one of the longest serving political prisoners in the U.S., along with Mumia Abu-Jamal. So we should just be conscious of that every day that the U.S. has political prisoners. You know, Washington always talks about political prisoners in other countries, but there are political prisoners in the U.S. And what's incredible is that PSL decided to run with him from prison, and a kind of race, kind of going back to Eugene Debs, who ran for the Socialist Party ticket from prison during World War I, and he was in prison because he opposed the slaughter of World War I. So we should always just keep that in mind. And then, of course, Julian Assange was mentioned. Every day we need to remind people, Julian Assange, a journalist, is being held as a political prisoner, being tortured, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has repeated again and again, he is being tortured. And what is his supposed crime? Telling the truth, exposing the crimes of the U.S. empire. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We at the Grayzone, we do this work because of people like you, for these social movements, for people who want to change in society, who don't want to just keep going on with this horrible system where we're told we have to pick between a far-right billionaire demagogue or a totally demented right-wing creep who can't even read a speech in the teleprompter without, having a brain fart every day. So thanks to everyone. We love all of you, especially the super chat people, because we're independently funded. We don't have a large foundation or something, so it means a lot to help support us. And unless Max has a final note, Max, I cut back to you. Is there a note you want to go out on?
No, I just want to say again, I hope we can be back here in a week, and everyone, really take your health seriously. This isn't a joke. I know there's a lot of skepticism out there about it, but we'll be back in a week, and there'll be, unfortunately, a lot of depressing things to talk about, and we hope to continue to illuminate the situation for all of you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, on that note, this is Ben Norton. We were speaking, that was Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil, and earlier we had our colleague Aaron Maté. The four of us, we are the Grayzone. So we are planning on doing these live streams much more regularly, and please come check it out, engage with us. We love to see all the comments. Free Julian Assange, free Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and all political prisoners. And go to the Grayzone, the Gray with an A, of course, thegrayzone.com, and you can keep seeing this kind of work. So that's it. We're out. See you soon.